Okay, so we just finished part 1 of lab 4, setting up the enzyme digestion. In the tube, you all have lactose, the substrate, and the enzyme lactase, which is supposed to break down the disaccharide lactose into monosaccharide, and then you incubate them in different temperature. And then so this is done, part 1, and now we're going to go to part 2 of the lab. And let's go to part 2, and here's part 2. Part 2 is the fermentation part. You're going to use yeast to add to all these tubes to see whether the lactose has been successfully broken down by the enzyme, because the yeast will use when disaccharide lactose is broken down to monosaccharide, and the yeast can use that monosaccharide to ferment and make bubbles. So we're going to measure bubbles in these tubes, okay? So what you're going to do right now is take out the tube that has been incubated in different temperatures. Just take them out, okay? And in the instruction, what they want you to do is you will take this detergent, whatever you have at home, and then you use a clean disposable plastic pipette right here. Remember, you always rinse it with tap water, clean tap water. You pour a little bit of your dish soap onto a tiny bowl or tiny cup, and then just use this to suck some of the dish soap up, and then just put 1 drop of dish soap into each one of the tube, 1 through 5, okay? So the dish soap will allow the yeast to make even more visible bubbles, so you can actually see them at the end of the experiment. In the lab 4 blue cap tube, besides lactose, powdered sugar, and then you have a lactase tablet, the micropipette tips. It should also have a little tube like this, filled all the way up with a with a tan color stuff. And this is yeast, the yeast that we use to bake bread or to make beer. So what they want you to do after you add a drop of detergent into the tube is you will use your handy dandy scale. Remember the tiny one you have? Mix it with 0 the scale, and you pour a little bit of this yeast onto the scale. They want you to measure 0.15 gram of yeast, and then you just put the yeast directly into the reaction, and then you want to gently kind of swirl it around, make sure the yeast will dissolve. Now, one thing that students always do is they pour the yeast in, and then it got stuck on the side of the wall, and then the yeast can't really touch the liquid at the bottom, then it can't really react. So once you pour the yeast in, make sure you aim to the center of the tube, put it in the bottom, and you make sure it dissolves. So then you have good reaction going, okay? So once you put yeast in all the tubes, tube 1 through 5, and this is the table in the lab quiz. Remember your tube 1 to 5, you already set up the sugar with the lactase enzyme, and now you're just adding yeast in each one of them, okay? So then at time 0, there's a crayon in your lab kit box, but you can also use a Sharpie. So I have a Sharpie right here. So once you add the yeast and dissolve it completely, you want to use a crayon or a Sharpie to mark where the solution is right at that point, okay? After you mark the top of where the liquid or the reaction is in the blue cap tube, then you can put these tubes. Remember the container you were using, you can put them back into the container. Now you want to adjust the water to temperature 40 degrees. Same thing, you use warm tap water to start with and adjust, and then you can just put them how many you can fit in 1 cup. I think in my case I can probably fit 3, and then the other cup I can put 2, but you can put all 5 in 1 container if you have a big one. And you adjust the temperature to 40 degrees Celsius using the handy dandy thermometer, just like what you did in part 1, right? And then every 5 to 10 minutes you want to check the temperature to make sure it stays at 40 degrees Celsius. And you want these yeast to work at 40 degrees Celsius for 30 minutes. If you go longer, it's fine, but you cannot go less than 30 minutes because yeast need time to make bubbles. So once the 30 minutes is up, then you use your marker again to check where the bubbles are, okay? And then let's say it's right here at the end of 30 minutes, and then you use the side of the tube where there are lines telling you, oh, 10 mil, 20 mil, you use that to estimate how many mil of bubbles that it has been generated by the yeast. And then you can tell which tube, which temperature will give you the most bubble. That means that the yeast is working on the monosaccharide, then it's telling you that that enzyme reaction, that temperature is the best for lactase to work on lactose. So that's how you can tell which, from the volume of the bubbles of each tube, you can then tell which condition will give you. Then you can tell which one of these 5 conditions in different temperature will give you, it is the best for the lactase to break down the lactose. Okay, so it's from the volume of the bubbles that generated. So that's why at the end you need to mark the bubbles, the final bubble volume carefully, and then you use the sign of the tube with the lines to estimate how many mils bubbles has been generated. Once you're done with lab 4, what you want to do is take your blue cap tube and then you want to dump all the content into the sink and then use either cold or warm clean tap water to rinse it out and then let it air dry. And then you want to do the same thing using cold or warm tap water to rinse out your disposable plastic pipette and your micro pipette tips. All these 3 things, you will need to reuse them again in the other labs in this course. Hope this has been helpful. Let us know whether you have any questions.